On today's episode, we'll talk about watching the shafts of light from the projector, calling Harry Stradling and James Wong Howe as a 10-year-old, Party of Five, Cop Rock, and of course, learning how to frame from Ansel Adams himself. Just a little bit of business before we start. There may be a curse word here or there in this episode, so please listen responsibly. As always, our website, theop.io, is up and chock full of tips, tricks, and gooey operator goodness. Make sure to check out The Breakdown, where the best operators in the biz explain shots they have done, The Musings, where we discuss everything from quick tips to larger concepts of storytelling, the answers, the images, and so much more. I may or I may not take a break or two during this episode, but I promise that none of them will be longer than 22 seconds. Finally, if you are enjoying the podcast, please follow us, write a review, share us with your parents, and talk us up around the water cooler with your friends. So grab a beverage, sit back, and enjoy the op. Thanks for listening.
Lock it up, nice and quiet, and let's roll.
Rolling. Victor 30 Echo, take 2.
Hey, Mark. Mark.
And camera set. And action.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Op Podcast, the podcast where we talk about operating and the art of visual storytelling. I'm here yet again from the Panavision Woodland Hills Theater because they allow me to be here because it sounds better than the parking lot. I am really excited to have an amazing cinematographer, Roy Wagner, ASC, here with me. Some of Roy's credits I include Ray Donovan, Elementary, House, Party of Five, Cop Rock, which I absolutely want to ask you about, Quantum Leap, Beauty and the Beast. According to what I'm assuming I'm right here on everything because there's so many of them, 2 Emmy nominations and 2 wins for Beauty and the Beast and Quantum Leap for cinematography, obviously, an ASC nomination for Beauty and the Beast, and a win for miniseries, cinematography in a miniseries, Drug Wars, The Cocaine Cartel. He was mentioned in the Kodak's Top 100 Directors of Photography in the World list. I should mention he is here today with his Chihuahua Scarlet, who is taking a nap in his lap, and maybe we'll hear from. But it's a real pleasure to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
This is great. You and I worked together like one day in New York City on Elementary, I think. Elementary
right.
was another show. Yeah.
Yes.
But I've obviously heard your name. You've been around for a while and done a lot.
Been around for 55 years.
Wow. When did you get into the industry?
I got into the industry a lot earlier than I got into the union. It took me 14 years to get into the union.
Wow. Okay.
So with all the right connections, I wasn't related to anybody, but I met Harry Stradling in 1955.
Amazing cinematographer.
Yes. And he introduced me to everybody else. And they all thought of me as sort of like Scarlet. I was like the little Chihuahua that followed him around in awe.
Oh, that's great.
And so I knew everybody, but they were getting older, and the union was set in its ways, and I was very naive, and didn't go at it necessarily the right way. And it took me 14 years to get into the union.
Wow.
But in the interim, I did every conceivable kind of job in the industry, from being a reader at MGM, working as an editor's assistant, working in theaters as a projectionist,
Wow.
working as a camera assistant, working as a director of photography on, that would have been cinematographer, on industrials, and fortunately, I never did pornos. That was one direction some guys went and did very well with, but I didn't do that and did a lot of low-budget features. I used to say I'm the most unreleased cinematographer in the world because I did so many of them that never got released.
So, backing up to the beginning, how did you meet Harry Stradling?
It's an often told tale now. I know it by heart.
Yeah.
But my mother and dad used to take me to the movies, and I would not watch the movie. It would drive them mad. I'd be sitting in the theater looking back at the projection booth. In those days, you could smoke in the theater, and there were these beautiful shafts of light that would dance across the auditorium.
Wow.
And I was fascinated by that. And they finally got so annoyed with me that they decided to take me up to the projection booth where I could see what was going on. And I was in, Netherlands. That was in a place. It was in the balcony in the very back, and there was just this glass port, and there was this hot, bright, shining light coming through it. And my dad arranged through the manager to take me up to the booth. And when the door opened to the booth, all this horrible, loud, cacophonous noise came out of it. And it was scary. I was like maybe 8 years old, 9 years old.
Yeah.
And I walked up a little set of stairs, and there were these two big, black, monstrous, like dragons, one of which was coughing out smoke from the carbon arc and light. And for me, it was like going into the Wizard of Oz, and seeing behind the drape and seeing the wizard at work. And here was this old man next to one of the projectors, and it was running, and he brought a stool up to the projector that was running. He said, "This is the movie." And he opened up the door, and he pointed into the gate, and there was all these still pictures upside down. And I couldn't equate that to the movie I had been seeing out in the theater. And he said 24 pictures per second. And again, it just made no sense to me. And I can only equate it. My son, I as well, but my son loves magic. And I can only equate it to being magic, the black arts. And I think that's what initially enchanted me about all of this, was that there was something that wasn't there that was there. That was very ephemeral, and I had to know more about it. Well, fortunately for me, the projectionist said, if you really want to know more about making movies, you should have your mother and dad write down the names of the cinematographers. You'll see their names at the beginning of the movies. And he said, after a period of time, you'll begin to see the same names over and over, and you'll go, oh, well, I like that movie, so maybe I like that cinematographer. And so one of the names I'd written down was Harry Stradling. Now, Harry was just one of the names I'd written down. I'd written down a number of names. So one day, and this is a town of 20,000 people, Sikeston, Missouri.
Oh, I was going to ask you.
And it's very small farm
like
community.
one theater kind of thing?
We had 2 theaters and a drive-in.
Okay.
The Malone, which was the upper crust fancy movie theater, which was actually like a neighborhood theater out here. And then the Rex, which was the Grindhouse, which was where all the cheesy, crappy, horrible films were shown that I was not allowed to go to. And the drive-in theater. And so after compiling for probably 3 months or 6 months of this list, my family went to the library, and my mother was a voracious reader. And I was in the library, again, tiny little town, and this man came up to the librarian and he said, do you have a phone directory for Los Angeles? What being at the right place in the right time is so eerie. If I had not heard him, if he'd not come in that day, what would have changed about my life? Because something clicked in me. Los Angeles, list of cinematographers. I can call them up. And you got to remember, this is the 50s, so people from the Midwest didn't do stuff like that. We were the flyover states. We were not the people that were considered artists, or which is odd, because I found out some of the greatest cinematographers came from the Midwest, like Greg Toland and Ted McCord and Robert Surtees, and quite a few very well-known cinematographers were artists. They did come to the Midwest, and I discovered that was all elitism, and that there was no truth to that whatsoever. Yeah. But anyway, so I got the phone directory. It was like 3 to 5 volumes. I can't even remember anymore. And I started going through names. Obviously, the names that were like Smith or something like that there were too many of them for me to call. And so I wrote down the names of these cinematographers and their phone numbers, and I started calling. Well, there was a lot of rejects, either because it was the wrong person or because they didn't want to talk to me. But some of them thought it was kind of cute that this little boy was fascinated with cinematography, because in those days there was no, art of cinematography. There was no art of makeup or hair or sound or anything like that. There was the director and the movie stars; those were everything.
Sure.
Below that, there was nothing.
You didn't write articles about the cinematographer
No.
in Time magazine.
There were very few people who read the American Cinematographer without purpose.
Yeah.
And today, anybody might read the American Cinematographer for whatever reason. And so I started calling the names.
How old are you at this point?
Probably 8 years old.
And you're calling them at 8 years old. And the other thing, by the way, for people who are listening today who may not realize, making a long distance call back then was a big deal. It was
terribly
expensive. It wasn't like now. I mean, nobody thinks about it. But
I mean, you picked up the phone. There was no dial. You waited for an operator. An operator would put the call through. And that's more of the story. But I started making all these calls, and one of the fellows who was very kind and did the worst thing in the world, which I do to everybody now, is say, look, if you're ever in Hollywood, look me up. Or if you ever have any questions, call me. Well, that was a kiss of death for him, because, I had leached onto this guy now. I was not going to let go.
Who was that?
Harry Stradling.
It was Harry Stradling.
And,
so wait, as an 8-year-old kid, you just called Harry Stradling up.
And he had this Yonkers accent. He was like from another world. He could have been speaking French, as far as I was concerned. I was a country boy, with a twang accent. And but the fact that he took the time to answer, and I had the dumbest questions in the world. I had no knowledge of anything, but he had patience with me, which I found out was one of the charming things about Harry. He loved to teach, which was kind of unusual for that generation. They didn't really know why they knew what they knew. They did it by the seat of their pants. There was no real science. There was a process, but they weren't quite sure they understood what it was. So that's why they hear a lot of them say, well, does Macy's tell gimbals? Or, I don't want to talk to you about this. Or they'd never say, I don't know.
Yeah.
But Harry took my call. And he and James Wong Howe, because he was an easy number to find in the phone book. Yeah. And I think Leon Shamroy were. So and Shammy was very crusty and gruff and scary, but he took my call. So okay, we're friends. And
all these guys are still working at this point?
Oh, yeah, by far.
They're in their careers.
The 50s are very. They're still up. Shammy was probably doing The King and I at that time. And Harry was still under contract at MGM, and Jimmy Wong Howe was at Warner Brothers.
That's amazing.
So they were, they had mistakenly picked up the phone and answered to my name was Buddy Wagner, because my father and my grandfather were Roy.
Okay. So
I was Buddy. So he said, well, if ever in town, let me know. And so fine. So this went on for a month until my mother and father got the phone bill.
I was going to ask about this.
And it was not good.
I'm sure.
They were not happy at all. And I then had to confess as to what I was doing, and then I had to suffer the consequences. And the consequences were, okay, can't do anything about this, but I'll tell you what, if you do well in school and if you behave yourself, we'll let you make one phone call a month.
Wow. So
now, poor Harry, he doesn't have a chance because he was the nicest one of the bunch. So I called him. I tried so desperately to think of the right questions to ask him, but as I look back on it now and I think about it, I'm sure they were the dumbest questions in the world.
You were 8 or 9 years old.
I didn't know what an f-stop was. I didn't know anything. But he was kind. I think he felt it was charming that the little boy wanted to know more about what he did.
It's an amazing story. It's incredible.
So, this has got to be a year later, 2 years later. My father wanted nothing to do with the movie business. My dad had played. He played baseball. He played minor league baseball for the St. Louis Cardinals, and when he got his marriage license, he and my mother had gone in and they discovered that he had high blood pressure, and that if he continued to play ball, according to the doctor, he would die by the time he was 50. So my father gave up on his dream. Now, I didn't equate this as giving up your dream because I didn't know what a dream was at that time. So I just insisted that, I wasn't going to give up. So my dad looked at the movie business as something very, very ephemeral, and lots of quote-unquote fairies and gays and weird people were all a part of the movie business, and he didn't want his son to be a part of any of this. And I had no qualms about it. I didn't know what any of that was, and I just knew that I loved movies, and I loved how I was being treated by these people that gave me consequence. They gave me a feeling like I was valuable, I was important. So one day I'm talking to Harry, and he says, "Where do you live again?" I told him I lived in Sikeston, Missouri, and he said. He said, "Can you put your father on?" So my dad got on the phone. He said, "Where are you in relation to Paducah, Kentucky?" And my dad told him, and he said, "Do you think you could take Buddy to Paducah on this particular date? We're making a movie there." And my dad said, "Yeah, we can come down." So we all got in the car. My mother boxed her lunch, and we drive to Paducah, Kentucky. Principally, in anybody's eyes in Hollywood, I would have been a hillbilly. I was backwoods hillbilly. But we went there, and I remember my first image of Hollywood. I'd always loved circuses, because when a circus came to town, there was all this color and all this light and all this energy and combustion. Everything changed. And in keeping with the black arts and magic, that was all a part of that.
Yep.
So here were all these people that were dressed in ties and suits, and everybody was Mr. or Mrs. And it was all this respect, and there had to have been 100 people there. And all these trucks and cables and these big lights, and I walked up to this one person, Charlie McGuire, who was the assistant director, who I ended up working with his son Dennis McGuire on Nightmare on Elm Street. And Charlie said, "Who are you here to see?" I said, "I'm here to see Harry Stradling." "Oh, Mr. Wagner, come with me." And my family, we all came, and there sitting behind the camera was this guy with his suit on and his nose up in the air and very, very powerful looking. And he turned to me and he said, "Okay, boys, it's time for us to step aside. Mr. Wagner here is going to take over for us." And he put me behind the camera, Mitchell B and C. And it was all very cute for them. And
again, you're 10 maybe at this point?
Yeah, no, not even that.
9?
Yeah.
Okay. This is great.
And puts me behind the camera, and they all step aside. And I don't even know where the wheels are. I don't even know where anything is. And this goes on for a couple of minutes, and there's a big laugh. And he introduces me around. I could care less about any of the rest of those people, the movie stars. Elia Kazan was the director. Andy Griffith was the star. And
what movie was it? Do you remember?
Face in the Crowd.
Okay. Wow.
For the first movie set I was ever on was A Face in the Crowd.
That's incredible.
This is disgusting, right? It couldn't be some cheesy,
no,
low budget.
Well, the other thing I'm sort of picturing is, between the Rackover and the dolly, the camera must have been bigger than you were.
Oh, absolutely. It was a Mitchell B&C. It was big, and the lights were big, and there were lots of people around, and they were all dressed in suits. It's like going to church, because everybody was dressed in their very best suits, and everybody's treating everybody nicely. And And I was just in awe of it. It was better than the circus.
Your parents must have been shocked by the fact that like this kid is walking in and
I
never met you.
I can't speak for them because
Yeah.
I could care less about what happened after
Sure.
I became the director of photography for that instant. So that's so, they say once you join the circus, you can't go back. That's when I joined the circus. There was no turning back.
9 years old.
And it was just like, and there was nothing to read. There was I got a subscription to the American Cinematographer magazine after I realized there was one, but there were no books. There was nothing to read about cinematography. So I was voracious about, trying to learn anything I could. And fortunately for me, my mother and dad, at least he's got something he's interested in. And so, I got involved with the local theater and, did whatever I could and continued to call Harry and do all that kind of stuff until the early 60s when I was able to come to Hollywood. My mother and dad allowed me to come to Hollywood for a week. And I came out and watched Harry work on a movie. It was My Fair Lady.
Oh my gosh.
And that was at Warner Brothers. And of course, there were other cinematographers there. So I met other cinematographers. And I don't even know how to describe this because, walking on soundstage for the first time when you're an adult is one thing. But when you're, a junior high school or high school, and you're walking onto one of these sound stages where there's 100-person crew, and on some of the sets it was incredibly quiet, some of the sets were loud, but it was just there was an enormity to it that was incomprehensible. It was like going to another planet. So I came back and realized then that was that. Got drafted into the military. I went to the Vietnam, but I was very fortunate in that I was stationed at after being incredibly persistent because they're going to make me a cop or some other silly thing, and I persisted with my basic training instructor and saying I want to take the test for photography. For cinematography, and he said, "No, you're not doing it. There's no room there. That you're not going to get in." I just continued to be persistent, which is dangerous because they can do all kinds of stuff to you.
Make you go away, right?
Yeah, and finally he said, "Okay, I'm going to let you take this test, but you better get 100%, because if you don't get 100%, you're going to have to take basic over."
Oof.
I got 100%, and which was kind of unusual because I was self-trained, really. I didn't know anything by book. And so my first assignment was Hollywood, California. I was going to be stationed at Lookout Mountain, which is in
Sure.
Laurel Canyon.
Yeah.
And so I called up Harry. I called up all the other cinematographers I had been talking to. And, well, oh, that's great. You're fantastic. You'll be close to us. You'll be able to come and see us work. And for the first 6 months, I think, I was stationed at Lookout. And then they moved the entire base to San Bernardino, to Norton Air Force Base, which I was devastated by. But I had the greatest commander in the world. His name was Dick Alexander. And Dick had been an animator before Vietnam, and he'd been brought back into the service. He worked at Disney, so he knew everybody. And Dick said, "Look, instead of you doing all this junk about building shelves here and doing all this KP work, I'm going to send you OJT."
What's that?
On-the-job training.
Oh, okay.
And I'll send you, away so you can do this. Well, I was excited about that because to Hollywood I was going to, but no, that's not what he had in mind. He sent me to Carmel or Monterey, which is where the base was. I would stay at the base, and he had a friend who was old friend who had horrible arthritis, who was a photographer, and that I would help him. And that would be my OJT. So once a month or every 2 months or something like this, I would go and be with this gentle, sweet old man who was Ansel Adams. Well, Ansel Adams in the 60s was nobody.
He hadn't been discovered yet.
No, he was just a gentle old man who loved to play piano, loved his dark room it was always filled with music, and it was very humanistic and naturalistic. And he said he started talking to me about photography, and I'd not really been interested in photography before.
Did you understand that he was a photographer?
I did. I understood he was a photographer, but I didn't really. He was no man.
Again, he wasn't Ansel Adams yet. He didn't get discovered. Yeah.
Bad arthritis, and he used these big cameras, and I thought, why didn't he take a little Nikon? So, and I saw his work, and I went, whoa, this is beautiful work. And he started teaching me the zone system.
Wow.
And the zone system, which to this day I use for everything.
Can you briefly explain that to someone who might not know what it is?
The zone system is a value from pure white to pure black, and it assigns a value from 0 to 8 as to what those values are, and you place your exposure generally in zone 6, and that gives you, it should be able to hold information in the negative from pure white to pure black.
Yeah.
And it's a form of pre-visualization, and it's a very simple way of saying it, but principally what it is was Ansel exposed a fat negative, a thick negative, because he knew that if he had a thick negative, he had all the detail in the shadows, all the detail in the highlights, and then he could, by burning in and doing certain things in the darkroom, he could bring back those densities and those values. Whereas if he had done what a lot of cinematographers did, which was underexpose, then what was ever in the shadows wasn't there anymore.
Was lost.
It was lost.
So he basically was getting the most information possible,
he was
and
getting
then
a
after
thick
the
negative.
fact he would decide.
If you look
that
at
he
his
would show.
negatives, they're pretty thick.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was an astonishing lesson, because it was not like what anybody else ultimately taught me about lighting and about exposure. So I fell in love with him, except for one thing. He told me that a cinematographer is not really a photographer. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, you don't control the final image. And I said, of course we control the final image. And he said, no, you don't. I can control every piece of this negative, whereas you have to do an overall. And then when you cut to the next shot, it has to stream along with the same values. I can dodge and burn. You can't do any of that, which drove me insane, because he was absolutely right, but I had no answer for. Except that when digital photography and when the Photoshop came, I thought to myself, Ansel would have loved this, because he would have embraced this 10,000%, because it was the power of the image and the power of controlling the image in the darkroom. I've always suggested that what we do now is we have the digital darkroom, electronic darkroom,
sure.
And we have now overcome what Ansel told me, which is we can't control our final image.
He just didn't have the technology back then.
No.
It didn't exist, not he.
Didn't exist.
Right. Did you learn anything about framing from him? Because that's all. I mean, his photographs are amazing, but the frames are always what
he had a simple picture frame that he would hold up in front of him, and he would adjust it back and forth and look through it. And everything for Ansel was pre-visualization. It wasn't just the composition; it was the essence of what everything meant in that frame. I'd never thought of that before. He said everything has a consequence, everything has a purpose. If you have a highlight here, why is it here instead of over here? Why is it that the black is the most powerful tool that a photographer has? Why are you using black there?
Wow.
And so everything was pre-visualization. And I must tell you, David, that to this day, everything is pre-visualization. That's why I think I'm so fast, is because I can turn on a dime. I don't have any plan. I obviously have a plan, but I can change that plan in a second because I'm not committed to it. Because, as you well know, actors don't go where they're supposed to go.
I'd never do that.
and directors change their mind.
Oh, yeah.
And the camera operator will say that's impossible. So, having this sort of same celebration of joy that Ansel had, where everything is valuable, everything has a purpose, but stand there and embrace it.
Yeah.
It was incredibly important to me. And he says, one of the things he said is embrace what you have and find out how to control it.
I like that a lot.
And I still, to this day,
That's genius advice right there from a brilliant.
And Ansel, not
visualizer.
Ansel, but Alan Davio used to say to me, he'd say, the key to being a great artist is knowing when not to do something. And there's so many times when I've looked at something, I said, gee, this looks beautiful. All I need to do is light the characters.
Yep.
Leave everything else alone. Light the characters.
That's amazing.
And so instead of saying, well, I want the 10K over here, instead of where it's coming from right now, you just go, well, that's gorgeous. It's beautiful. Let's embrace what we have. And you'll be astonished how, for me, images are like music. They're lyrical. And they have an expression. And, whether it's color or light or shadow or camera movement, all of them have a reason for being. It's part of our grammar. And certainly English grammar is different than Chinese or from other countries. Color has a different, red means something else somewhere else. Left to right means something somewhere else. I mean, we read from left to right. So from my point of view, the left side of the frame is the weak side of the frame. The right side of the frame is the powerful side of the frame. Huh. Because we read and we culminate there and we have to transition back to the next set of words. And so Ansel started it all. And I don't think I really got it all then. I think it kind of it's exploded throughout my career.
Oh, so there were down the road there were now I understand what he was saying.
I mean, to this day, I'm 77 years old, and I still think I'm still learning.
Yeah.
Because there's just something about this that is so visceral and alive that you can't kind of put it in a box and say, well, it fits here and this is all perfect, which is not what the producers would like, not what the studios would like. They'd like everything to be in a little tiny box and,
sure, AI,
so we could do all AI. And that's okay. There's certain things that help us a lot. But without the human spirit, without that manifestation of your own personal journey, it just becomes somebody else's box, and the boxes are all the same. And I find that's, when I watch movies today, there's so many copycats, and it's not that we're less talented. I mean, we have more powerful tools than we've ever had in our life, but the fact is that we've become lazy and just said we accept this because this is what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I want to back up and ask you a question about Ansel Adams. So just so I understand, you're saying that when he's lining up these incredible frames that we've seen and come to know, nature and whatnot that he's done, he had an empty frame that he would move towards his face and back from his face to decide where he wanted to frame the image. Mm-hmm. He took that, and so that's incredible to me because we all do with our hands or whatever, but that there's just something I love about that image of him.
Ansel was a very bohemian person. I mean,
it's wonderful.
He would dry his prints in his oven, and until he got to the final print, he would dry his prints in his oven. I mean, everything if you looked at his darkroom, you go, "Wow, can't you afford more? Can't you afford better?" And he didn't want it.
Was he? I forgive me for not knowing this, but was he alive when he achieved the fame that he since has? Or
He began to get it.
Okay.
I knew him in I think it was 67, 68. And I must say that for me, he was never Harry Stradling.
Yeah.
Because I was stupid. I didn't know. And I didn't really realize the power that he had.
Until later.
Until all this, the essence of who he was. But his celebration of life, his embracing the image, all these things sort of, you couldn't get, it was like, it was like the gospel. It was somebody was teaching you something that you were not going to learn until way down the road.
And you didn't even understand. But the reason that I ask why, when he achieved fame, which I thought that was the case, because there's something to me that's interesting about that I think that, if you look at all the great filmmakers that we know who at some point they were making movies and just making it the way that, and then they achieve fame and then everybody's looking at them. And then there's almost like, well, I've got to replicate or I've got to do this. I think it affects the process, whereas he was just doing what he thought was beautiful for the sake of art and beauty.
I've always said this. Here is the danger. And this is not a steadfast rule. I'm not really sure about this, but I do believe that first works are the best works. Steven Spielberg's best work is his first works. Alan Davio's first works are his best works. It's because we don't really know what makes us good. And so these things that we stumble upon and through the innocence of expression, suddenly you go, wow, that's uniquely different. I mean, Vilmos is a perfect example, Laszlo, Haskell. Everybody in their initial early works have this unique voice that they don't even know why they're doing what they're doing. And then when they become successful, they try to replicate.
They're overthinking it probably, right?
Absolutely.
And there's pressure to give a Spielberg movie or give an Alan Davio image or whatever, which maybe they don't even completely understand what that is.
They don't. Nobody understands.
Yeah.
Nobody understands what makes themselves great.
The other part of that I've always felt, and I don't know whether this is true, but I think it's true, is I think when you become someone that big, you suddenly get surrounded by so many fans that you don't have people who are willing to go, that's a really bad idea. Because they go, well, I don't know, I'm nobody. You're Steven Spielberg, you're Martin Scorsese, whatever. That must be a good idea.
It's the king's new clothes.
It's exactly right. And I don't. And this is such a collaborative medium that, I mean, I know sometimes I'll be setting something up and my dolly grip will look at me and go, this is the dumbest thing. Why aren't we doing that? And it'll snap me out. And I'll go, oh my God, you're so right. But people, I think we need that.
It's critically important, and it's what I love about motion pictures, and it's what took me a long time now we talk about operators, we talk about assistants, and all of this, and the value and the importance of all that. I mean, I did so many films where I had to do both, where I had to operate.
We're operating
and I loved operating. I absolutely loved it. I'm really still to this day good with wheels. I'm very good handheld. Yeah. But one night on a movie called Witchboard, Conrad Hall and Billy Fraker came to visit. And we were doing smoke and all that. And Connie said, Roy, how can you judge a smoke when you're operating?
Oh.
And I'd never thought about it. I thought, you
mean the level of the smoke?
Yeah, the value of the smoke. And I never thought about it. And I thought, well, that's okay. I get that. But I didn't have any choice. I had to be the operator as well. And besides that, when I was growing up, I'd watch a lot of cinematographers reading the racing forums or the newspapers or the trades, and the gaffer be doing all their work, and the camera operator be setting up a camera, doing all this stuff, and I'd say, well, why do you need a director of photography?
They're doing the work for you.
Yeah. The operator's setting up the shot, the gaffer is lighting the set. Why do you need a director of photography? So for me, I became frightened. I said, wait a second, why are you in this business? Or do you think, are you here just to read the paper and sit back and go, yeah, put a double on that and, do what those old men did? Because they'd done it 6-day weeks for 40 years, and so they were not going to have the same kind of passion that young Roy Wagner was going to have. Yeah. And so I determined that I was going to outthink myself and outthink the gaffer and the operator, because I didn't want people to figure me out. And I was afraid that if you figured me out, that I was going to become, oh, that's Roy Wagner. That's the way his stuff looks. And I was scared. And I didn't get over that until I did Party of Five.
Really?
It took a long time when I realized that I had limitations, because I'd not run against that wall of limitations of where the light goes and how I can make it uniquely different. The gaffer would come, yeah, you want a 5K over there, right? And I'd go, no, I want it over here because I'm going to be different. I'm going to be Roy Wagner. And when I stopped operating, David, this sounds silly. When I stopped operating and I started trusting my gaffer, I thought, well, what am I going to do here? I can't sit in my chair and read the paper. I just can't do that. What am I going to do? So I stood behind the camera like an umpire, like thinking I was going to call balls and strikes.
Wow. And
I was very tough on operators. This is before monitors, before we were doing it. So I was tough on the operators until a fellow named Al Betcher, who was a great operator, said, come over here, I want to talk to you a second. And
this was on he was your operator on a project.
But he was he'd worked with everybody.
His name.
And he worked with everybody. And he said, look, I'm just here. You can use me. You don't have to use me. I respect you. You're the director of photography. I'm here to help you. I'm here to support you. I don't want to steal anything from you. And just let me do my job. And if you let me do it and don't like it, then get rid of me.
Yeah.
And he was so talented and so good. And he found things I had thought of, but he found more than I could find. Mm-hmm. And what it did for me was, it didn't make me lazier, it just freed me up. It gave me more power than if I had tried to do everything.
So do you think that was just because you learned to trust the fact that you had value beyond operating, that you didn't have the fear anymore?
It was definitely fear. It was definitely fear about my own limitations, and it's a sort of a challenging path that the union has provided for us. Gaffers never get to be directors of photography. But the truth is, there are many gaffers that should be directors of photography.
And some of them do make that jump, but it's not. But it's not easy.
But back then, none of them did.
No,
and that was unfair. It was wrong, because there were some incredibly talented gaffers, and I've always contended that part of the union should be, when you get to a point from assistant, I think you should work as an electrician. So you learn the cables, you learn power distribution, you learn how grimy and dirty it is to wrap cable and clean cable. So when, as a director of photography, you say, put a 10K out there 100 yards away, you know what it takes to do that. You know what it means, yeah. Instead of, when a production manager comes up to a cinematographer and says, hey, what's taking so long? Well, you have an answer.
Yeah.
And then you also become a more responsible person, because you say, I don't really need that light out there. There's got to be a simpler way to do this. And the thing is that also, and this is, for a camera operator, every position has a lot of power. And if with that power comes regard and respect for everybody else, then it becomes an extraordinary process. But if, for example, the camera operator doesn't collaborate with, because the director will just separate the director of photography from the process and go right to the operator, and you don't have any part of that journey. But if the operator brings you back in to that journey, it doesn't steal anything from the operator, and it certainly gives you the gift of being a participant in the process. And so I always want people to regard and respect me as they expect me to respect them. And that allows for great operating and great gaffing and great camera assisting and all of it. I find a lot of danger today because actors sidestep the director, go right to the assistant because the assistant's right there, or the operator. And for the danger for the operator or the assistant is engaging with the actor, and the actor will say, "Is that okay? Did I do okay?" And instead of, with certain directors, I remember with George Cukor, you weren't allowed to talk to the actors.
It was a different time, that's for sure.
And I think there is something to be said for that, in that it regards the journey for each of us. And a sense of respect. Now, how does respect, respect is sort of like this dirty little word, but if you equate it to community, which is what we're missing in Hollywood, frankly everywhere now, a sense of community, because we would not be going through all these strikes now if the owners had a sense of the value of this community.
As opposed to an us versus them mentality.
Right.
No, agreed.
Because the truth is cranky and as mean-spirited as those old men could have been, they knew each other, they knew each other's families, they knew the value. If you'd had a bad day and maybe you had been drinking too much, they found somebody to cover for you that day. And they'd put you in the camera room and you'd sleep.
Did that happen a lot back then? Really?
A lot.
Interesting.
And and there was in the 70s there were drugs.
Oh, sure.
And but the thing is, it wasn't any of that was right, but it was that everybody knew each other, and there was a sense of regard and respect for not just the artist but the person.
I've got your back, you've got my back, kind of thing. Yeah.
And it created this huge bond of respect for each other that I don't see anymore. I mean, Alan Davio's crew was fantastic. I had a great crew. I mean, there's lots of examples of great crews that still exist, but for young filmmakers, they don't realize how powerful the oneness, how important that is.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's changed also is just that, I don't know what the reasoning is, but it's very hard unless a director of photography goes from project to the next project to the next project to the next project. For most people, it is hard to keep your crew together because people do have to work. And so if you don't have something lined up for whatever reason, either you don't want to go back to work right away or you've got to do post or whatever, your crew may go off onto something else. So I know I find in my career, I get in sync with people and I love it, and then you fall out of sync with people and it's just the nature of the beast, unfortunately.
Well, that happened in Hollywood of the 30s, 40s, and 50s too, into the 60s, in that, the crew would stay with one studio. And the cinematographer might work, you were under contract for 2 years or 3 years. You generally work 40 weeks a year. And you would bounce from one cinematographer to the next, but you were part of that same
so
company.
You come back through again, right? Yeah.
And so that was good. The problem happened in it was the late 60s, early 70s, I believe. I can't remember anymore, but I think I think it was about that time when we were all working 6-day weeks.
I didn't realize that, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, we worked 6-day weeks, from the beginning of the movie business until the 60s, even in Hollywood, there were a lot of companies still working 6 to 8 weeks. That meant you didn't know your family.
And that was the norm, you're saying?
Oh, it was the absolute norm. And, then it became only when you went on location did you work 6 to 8 weeks. The reason was that you took your Hollywood crew with you on location. So for the producer, they said, well, all you're doing is sitting there for 2 days. You're going to work 6 to 8 weeks, just like you do at home. And when the producers started, how they convinced directors of photography and then gaffers, then key grips to not take their crews, was they were saying, look, if you don't take your Hollywood crew, if you pick up locals, you can work 5 day weeks. And that was sort of the lollipop that they caused everybody to transition to 5 day weeks. So when we started going on location, like in Canada, because Canada became a big deal, we couldn't take our crew.
Wow.
And you could if you were a tough guy and you were strong. You said,
But it was
I'm taking my crew, but you weren't going to survive doing that. You might take it for 1 or 2 shows, and then they'd say, well, we're going to find somebody that will use the local crew.
Wow.
So that was the end of the Hollywood crew, where everybody was bonded together. Well, there's always good with bad. That happens with everything. One of the things that I think is a huge mistake, but I understand why it happens, is there was such a loyalty with regard to, I give you an example, Alfred Hitchcock. Bob Burks was his cinematographer, and Lenny South was his camera operator. Lenny was one of the guys I used to call. Maybe we became very close friends. Lenny's the guy that got me in the union. When they worked together, they became family. So if the cinematographer got fired, the crew would leave.
Yeah.
And nowadays that doesn't happen.
Like you said, it's pluses and minuses.
Yeah, and the other thing that would happen is that you would not walk off a show to take another show because of loyalty. It was disrespectful.
Sure.
So you stayed with the show. You might only have 3 days left of that show and might be able to pick up a 6-week show. But those old filmmakers did not do that.
Amazing.
They stuck together. They stuck together and stayed, and it frankly worked quite well. The downside of it is that you can't count on anybody anymore.
Exactly.
So what does the cinematographer do? Well, that means, I don't need that guy I've been using forever. I'll just get somebody else.
Yep.
So it allows for a bigger community, but regrettably, that bigger community is not serviceable.
Yeah.
I remember when the head of the union, when I kept getting 29 days in the union, and I couldn't get my 30th
Yeah,
day.
to get the 30 days, right? Yeah.
He'd come to me and say, Mr. Wagner, today's your last day. And I'd say, how do you know this was tomorrow was my 30th day? We know. And he said, look, we love you. We'd love to keep you working, but this is the rule. If I can't keep everybody employed, then there's no room for you. I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
And granted, they would take father and sons, do all that stuff. But
yeah, there was a lot of nepotism back then.
There was. And there was a lot of bad with that. But the truth, I respect that they had found this formula. I can keep this many people employed.
Yep.
Now, today, wouldn't we love to have something like that?
No, absolutely. Like you said, everything's good and bad. It's a tough one. Before we move ahead, I have one question about Ansel Adams, and this is conjecture on your part, but I'm just wondering. With someone who spent so much time figuring out what the frame was and like you said, prepping the image before taking the image, what do you think he would have thought of today, of digital photography today, where you take the image, you look at it, you can take multiple images without any issue and decide?
Ansel was not, and this is my perception.
Yeah.
He was not a technologist. If you looked at his cameras, his processing equipment, it wasn't like any of that stuff was precious. One of the things that drives me mad nowadays. If you read anything on Facebook, I think that technology should follow expression. Expression shouldn't follow technology. By that I mean that the new things, the new cameras, the new lenses, they don't make us who we are. I mean, we are who we are. We are our own voice, we're our own signature. They expand our ability of expression in some ways, or define our ability. But like when I grew up, we all used the same camera. It was a Mitchell B&C. We all used the same lenses, and yet every one of those cinematographers had their own unique look. So how's that possible? Have the same film stock, same lenses, same cameras, same lights, but they're different. But today, everybody's looking for, I've got to have the Venice camera, I've got to have the red camera, I have to have this set of lenses, I have to have these lights. and the truth is, it does a very dangerous thing to you, is it sort of packages you in your own mind as to who you are. So when I go into a producer or production manager, I don't have to say, well, I got to use this camera, I've got to use these lenses, because oftentimes the studio has a particular rental house they like to use. They have a particular relationship they have, and if I can't find Roy Wagner in that set of lenses or that camera, there's something scary wrong with that, because I might find something in that set of lenses that I never found before.
Sure.
And so that to me is exciting.
So it's an opportunity as opposed to a hindrance.
Well, now this brings us back to Ansel and your question. Ansel celebrated life. He celebrated the image. And I think it has a lot to do with the poetry of Ansel Adams. He loved music. And there is something about finding that spirit within you that makes you uniquely who you are, that allows you, when they look at your work, that's Dave Kamendes. That's, you look, I can tell that's him. That's how he frames a shot. Oh, that's Steven Spielberg. That's how he's, we all have this unique subliminal thing we don't even understand ourselves, why we have to do that uniquely nuanced adjustment to do something that makes us connect, or that harmonic tone that's within us ring true to who we think we are. And I think that was what Ansel was. He never talked about it, but all you had to do was see him working and know that for him, it was all celebration. And when he was standing and dodging and burning an image, his hands were all crippled, but he had this way of, everything was just so precise and precious and beautiful. And I know for him, he never thought of it that way. And he was just following the muse. And I think for me, my fear of being caught, being found out, for finding out my limitations, this is a story that goes, as I said, back to Party 5. There was a point where, and this is how long it took me to discover this. I was standing watching the director rehearse, watching the actors. There were 5 actors, almost always, Party 5, 5 actors in the shot all the time. And I would stand and I'd be watching with the director. My hands would be clenched. I'd be thinking, "Oh God, don't go there! Don't go there! If you go there, I can't put the light there. Don't make that move. The camera needs to go over here. Please don't put the camera over there. It's not going to work. It's going to be horrible."
This is all your internal
monologue.
monologue.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
This is going on.
And it would ultimately burst out in this fear that directors must have thought, "Oh, this guy's an arrogant asshole." But this fear that, well, we got to have the camera here, or the camera should be here. It should be a 50 millimeter, should be this or that. And this was going on during that time. And one day, it was actually one night, I had it. We were out on location, and we were going to be shooting a crowd scene. And the director said, well, I want the camera in the middle of it. I want to be able to see everything. Now, remember, those days, we had to light everything if you want to see it.
It wasn't digital, yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And I freaked out internally. And it suddenly occurred to me, I said to myself, okay, Roy, what's wrong with you? You say you love cinematography, but every time you get a chance to do something, you're incredibly intense and incredibly frightened, and you're stoic, and people must be saying, well, it's his way, it's got to be his way. Stop it. What's the worst that can happen? If they go over there where your light's supposed to be, is there only one place you know of that the light should go?
Mm-hmm.
Is there only one camera, a place for the camera? Is there only one lens? You've done everything that's conceivable up to this point. You've put the light wherever it had to be. Even if there was no source there, you found a way of putting the source there. Stop it. Why don't you just celebrate the moment? And I got to tell you, David, I mean, as I express it now, it sounds so simple. It sounds so simple, but it was a combustion that happened that changed everything for me.
Really? Wow.
And I from that point forward, I said, the actors come back, I wouldn't move there after rehearsal. And you've been through this, I'm sure, 1,000 times.
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't move there. No, the camera, I don't want to be out of focus at that moment. No, I wouldn't move to that window. And it just destroys all your plans. So, okay, let's go back, re-rehearse, do all that. But if you're celebrating life, if you're celebrating the moment, if you're in the moment, they can do whatever they want. Because you've not fixed anything in your mind, in your brain, said it has to be this way.
It's just a new hurdle rather than a wall, basically.
It's just part of the joy.
Yeah, yeah.
And what happens is that when you have no fixed physicality, because they don't, actors don't have any real true physicality. I mean, movement, certainly, but we move metal.
Yeah.
And it takes time. But if you don't have any of those restrictions, and it's not because I've already put a light there and I've already done this here and I've already got the track coming in, it's going to be here. If you've done all that, you can be incredibly fast because what you're doing is just flowing with the expression of the actors and the director.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I started getting my reputation for being really fast, was when I let go of everything. And I started letting go of poor Gary Huddleston, who was I moved him up from first assistant to camera operator, and I was so rigid on framing. I was so rigid. Hollywood moves, you had to, the move didn't end when the actors ended. There's so many things that I did that I shouldn't have done. And I started working with better operators, working with really, really fine operators, and I just began to let go and let them be, who they were.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, 99% of the time, they understood what I wanted, but they found a way of doing it in a bigger and grander and better way, and had a deeper meaning than I could have brought to it, because it was now not just my spirit, but it was their spirit connected with me and with the director and with the actors, and it was just this combustion.
Yeah, that's what you hope for, right? Is that you just keep passing off the ball and everybody takes it and
it
moves
does. It
forward.
Happens that way because everybody wants to please their parent. And, our parents, the studio, our parents, the director, our parents, the director of photography, the actors. We all want to please. We're not here to hurt anybody, but when you get hurt yourself, you become this cynical, crusty, bitchy old man who says, yeah, well, that's not the way we do it here in Hollywood. And, it's not just a disease in Hollywood, it's a disease everywhere.
Sure.
And so I just, I'm enjoying the ride. It's been an amazing journey for me.
Well, it sounds like you had a specific switch at that moment, and and you rediscovered.
It was a long
what you
time
loved
coming
about it.
too, and it was a lot of directors who were messing with me by saying, the camera starts here, and we're going to go over here.
Because they knew it would send you, you mean?
Oh, they just wanted to push.
Yeah. There are people like
they
that.
weren't trying to bully me as much as they were trying to push the envelope.
Yeah.
And them pushing the envelope forced me to push the envelope. I wasn't mature enough to know how to do that.
Sure.
And it just became this incredible celebration. And what I found is that if an assistant, when an actor or a director comes up and says, "What do you think about this?" If an assistant says, "Well, let's talk to the cinematographer," that's a wonderful thing. The operator, the same thing. And it doesn't steal anything from the operator, doesn't steal anything from the assistant. Same thing for everybody, the whole journey. And it's one of the things why I frankly don't operate. I love operating, but I won't operate. And the reason is because if I operate, I'm here. And I might hear a peripheral conversation here and there, but I'm right there
Because
on that frame
your focus
line.
is so narrow.
And I have to chase the frame lines.
Yeah.
And I'm not looking at the photography. I'm chasing the physicality of that frame line, my own personal physicality, where my legs are, where my footing is. If I am with that director, I hear every conversation that comes to that director. I hear all those things, like from a script supervisor or someone back in what I call Vidiot Village, standing there going, "Yeah, well, I don't know about that. That wouldn't be." I can assimilate all that knowledge, and I can edit and say, "Well, okay, well, let's adjust this." If I were back at that camera as a camera operator, I wouldn't have that expansive
all the input
from all those voices that you think don't mean anything.
Yep.
But makeup and hair, they're powerful. They can say things that can deeply affect you.
Yep.
And I love the power of a great camera operator. Mm-hmm. There is nothing better than a great camera operator. And here's the tragedy. It used to be that the director of photography was the ephemeral position because everybody had a better cinematographer. There was always a director who'd come in, "Oh, yeah, this guy's good, but I have this guy I just worked with who's the most amazing cinematographer in the world." When I was doing House, I took over House after, I think, the 5th episode. They had this issue with operators. I had the best Bobby Stradling was my operator. Bobby and Owen Roisman's son were great operators. But every director came in and had a better operator. "Oh, we have the best operator." And we had Jeff Mart, the Steadicam operator.
Jeff Mart, sure.
And Jeff was just amazing. He was going through a lot of trials at that time because he was going through catastrophic.
He had some tough times, unfortunately.
Yeah.
He's a great operator, great guy.
Oh, and a sweet man.
And probably there's no one that I know who loves Steadicam more than Jeff Mart.
And Newmore.
Yeah, I mean, he lived and breathed it. Yeah.
And he lived in his car because he lived all the way up in near the...
it's like the Panga or something like that?
No, he lived further. He lived near the Grapevine.
Okay. But I know, and the Jeff Mart, I don't know if you know this, but the Jeff Mart story that I remember that he told me was he built like a mine into the hill behind his house, and he had like a railroad track. I mean,
Jeff was a character. He was the best.
Yeah.
And Jeff was wonderful. He would do anything for you.
Yeah.
But he got fired any number of times, and I would keep bringing him back.
Yeah.
"Oh, I've got this great operator." And then they wouldn't like that operator. And said, "Well, let me bring Jeff back." So I'd keep bringing Jeff back. And Jeff was really the operator, a Steadicam operator on the show. And but he got so exhausted because of the travels, and then he was sleeping in his car and all that. There was a point where what I'm getting at is that we've got to embrace the people that surround us and understand that there may be somebody better, but the truth is that we have to bond together as a body and service the material and service the studio and service the producers, and they have to allow us to be the unique voice that we are, or not. And that's why we go through so many cinematographers. That's why we go through so many camera operators, camera assistants. But operators are principally the position that gets fired quicker than anybody now.
It does happen, yeah. There's no question, because it doesn't upset the apple cart quite as much as maybe the DP, and sometimes it's on a road to that. We've all been there. But
or they'll say, well, we can't fire the director, so we'll fire the cinematographer.
Yeah, right.
We can't fire the cinematographer, so we'll warn him of firing his operator.
Exactly. It's a warning blow. Unfortunately, it's a weird industry. Let me ask you a specific question about operator. What makes a great operator to you? What do you look for in it? Like when you look at someone and they go, "That's a great operator." What is it?
They listen and they observe. I mean, finding the expression. If you don't know composition, if you don't know how to hide your moves, if you don't know how to, there's no way really to teach that. I mean, it's something that a great operator they find. And they get better over a period of time, and you have to invest. You have to invest in people and make sure that you care about the person, that they're a great listener, they're a great partner. They know where they stand within the relationship, and that's critically more important than if you have these big giant credits, or you come in with a swagger because I know more than you do. I mean, I want somebody that's a partner. It's like a marriage.
Very much so. Yeah, it's a good way to explain it.
And you know, there's no perfect marriage. There's no perfect relationship between a cinematographer and an operator. An operator has to understand that. I mean, I have friends that are operators that say that I'll never be a director of photography because I hate the politics.
Right here.
And gaffers too.
Yeah.
And gaffers and operators who should be directors of photography.
Well, the thing that I always say is, the main reason is because when I get in my car at night, essentially, unless my director of photography calls me or the assistant calls, or some question, my phone is turned off. Mm-hmm. Whereas the director of photography, I know they're probably going into a meeting, or they're
absolutely
in a meeting on their car on the way home.
There is no time off.
And on Saturday and Sunday.
That's just, every day.
Yep.
And if I had to tell you one thing I love about being a cinematographer over anything else, it's that collaboration and that partnership with a body of people. I mean, if I miss anything about not working, it's when I don't have that body of people around me.
It's the people, yeah.
It's not the cameras.
Yeah.
It's not the lenses, not the light. I mean, I love all that stuff. But it's that relationship. We're all carnies.
Exactly.
And, we all need each other. It's when it's working properly, there's nothing like it.
Yeah. What advice do you have for a younger operator or any operator actually, who's in the situation where the director of photography and the director both have different visions, and they're not seeing eye to eye, and so they're both coming to the operator with different ideas? Because it does happen.
Well, you have to service. The director of photography has to respect the director.
Yeah.
And has to respect the operator's position, and has to understand that you have to service the director.
So at the end of the day, you're doing it with the director, but do you come to the director of photography and just say, I just wanted to let you know he's asking me to do this? Absolutely.
Yeah. It takes you out of the I have to tell you, on the other hand, I've been in situations where I've had an operator who was a superstar operator, and no better than any of the other great operators I've worked with, but he was a superstar.
With the big credits and the big this.
Yeah. And the director he wouldn't talk to the operator. He would come to me and say, I don't like, he's not holding horizon lines. His frame doesn't lock at the end. You got to go talk to him. Mm-hmm. So I'd be the one to have to go talk to the camera operator.
And just so I know, were you in agreement on those assessments, or was that okay? So it was something that was a problem.
He was he was not as good as he thought he was.
I was going to say, this is not an operator who's ready to hear that, probably.
No.
Yeah.
And, a director can tell me, I don't like the light coming from there. I don't like that camera movement. I don't like the color of that light. Now, I have two choices. I can say, well, it's my way or the highway, or I can say, oh, well, okay, let's try something else.
Yeah.
It doesn't make me less of a person. I always say that you have a lot of power, but never show it. Because when you show it, you realize how little you have. And this operator I'd come to him and say, the director wants you to do this. And I could see him getting more and more frustrated. I'd go to the director and say, he's not happy with me saying this. He said, well, that's what I want. This is a famous director, famous camera operator. So I'm the go-between. So this has happened to me twice. With the same director, two different operators.
Yeah.
The camera operator called me out on the set in front of everybody and said, I don't give a shit what you want. This is wrong. You don't know what you're talking about, or something like that. And the director heard it and fired him right away.
Wow.
And, of course, his crew walked with him.
Yep.
And I ended up being the bad guy. I'm sure this camera operator still thinks to this day that it was me that was making all these minor adjustments. But even if I was me and I was making all these minor adjustments, it's Roy Wagner. He's an asshole. Okay, I'm working with Roy Wagner, the asshole. I'll put up with him until this is over with.
But even so, like you were saying before, there is a pecking order of things, and you're the director of photography, and if that's what you want, I always say, look, you don't have. My idea is better, but that doesn't mean you have to do my. Obviously, I think it's better because it's what I think is the right way to do it. But if that's not what you see, my job is to give you what you want.
But the other thing is to take me aside and say, can we figure out a way of communicating better?
That's exactly right.
And we're always being put into awkward positions. Actors will put us in a weird place where. With Johnny Lee Miller, you couldn't put light in his eyes. It was just elementary. Elementary, yeah. He was obstinate about that. You could not put light in his eyes at all.
So it's an extremely tough thing to deal with. Yeah.
So we were working
because it would distract him from.
He was incredibly sensitive to light.
Oh.
And Ronnie figured it out, and I didn't.
Yeah.
And
Ronnie is
Ron Fortunato.
Okay, yeah.
And so it was just I couldn't. There was a point where I just couldn't do it anymore.
Wow, that's amazing.
But there's all kinds of people like that. I mean, actors will put you in places. People get played. I mean, it's not just movie business. Everybody plays people against each other to get their way.
Yeah.
Their power, and you have to be smart enough to step away from that, just like I did on Party 5, and say, quit being frightened. Quit, fear causes anger, and you've got to get past this and find out the solution, resolve this. Because when people ask me what I do, I tell them I'm a crisis manager. The lighting, that's the simple part. The composition, simple part. Where do you put the camera? Simple. All of that is sort of the birthday cake. But what they hire me for is being a crisis manager. How do you resolve and solve the problems of a day and get all the? It's like being in the military and being the general or the sergeant that makes sure your troops get home at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And that is principally what I am. I hate to say that. Because you want to say, I'm this great artist, I'm this great, and you hope you are those things. But in truth, what they hire you for, because they don't know the difference between light and shadow and color and all that. All they're doing is, did you get me through the day?
Did you make the day?
Yeah. And how much money did it cost me?
It's similar to, I've discussed with operators before, there's this idea that the A camera operator runs the set. I mean, it's well known within the industry. People say that, and I'm always uncomfortable with that, because the reality is, first of all, there's any number one of people, but reality is it's really the AD who kind of runs the set. I mean, that's sort of their job. So I sort of look at it as part of my job when I'm camera operating is to help make sure that the set doesn't devolve into chaos, which it's crisis management. It's sort of going, all right, what's going to stop the train? Let me see if I can push that away and do something there.
But in truth, it takes all of those different, the AD, camera operator, the camera assistant, the director of photography, the
100%.
gaffer, the key grip, all the department heads. If everybody's harmonically in tune with each other, that's the only way you overcome crisis.
Yeah.
And if you look at the most successful practitioners, there are those who do that job. I mean, anybody can apply makeup and make it. If you can't apply makeup and make it look good,
Yeah.
I mean, it's very subjective.
Absolutely.
Where you put the light, where you place the exposure, it's very subjective.
Yeah.
But there's nothing subjective about 10-hour days. Nothing subjective about the budget, line item budgets. There's nothing subjective about that. And if, as an artist, you can come to Jesus moment and say, okay, well, that's what I'm here for.
Yeah.
And that you work with the AD, you work with the camera operator. So it's not just, on the camera operator that he has to run the set. It's on all of our responsibilities to run that set. And to find our place within it. Once you do that, it just becomes, it's not fair to the operator to say you got to run that set.
Yeah.
Not fair. It's truly the AD, and there's plenty of ADs who are sycophants to the production manager or sycophants to the studio that will allow a crew to fail themselves or fall upon themselves because they don't want to get in the middle of it. And so then it rolls down to the operator or the cinematographer.
Yeah.
And so it's critical that I always tell the assistant director that you're my best friend. You and I are going to walk away at the end of the day as good friends, because I want to know where your problems are, so I can find out a way of making your day better. And the same for me with the camera operator and assistant. You just want people that are there. The truth is, if you're responding to what's in front of you instinctually, you'll find focus better. No matter how many times you run that tape measure, you'll find focus better by being instinctual. And the same thing with an operator. If the actor doesn't hit their mark, or if something is flawed, it doesn't work the way it should, your instincts will combust and make the shot better than it was. And there's so many happy accidents.
It's all about happy accidents. And the thing to me about that is, part of it is instincts, and part of it is also understanding the story ahead of time and knowing what the story is, so that when something happens, you can go, I know this wasn't planned, but this tells the story, and this is what I'm doing.
It's astonishing how sometimes it's even better.
Yeah.
Because everybody says, that was a beautiful shot, it was this or that, and you'll go, that was a mistake. That wasn't what I planned for it to happen. It was not at all what I planned. So you mentioned cop rock. I mean, for me, I have taken the journey of filmmaking. I don't know if you know the Bible story of Ruth, who would go into the fields and she was not allowed to sharecrop. She had to take the remnants of what was left over, and what was left over was better than what everybody else had taken, because she embraced what was given to her, and allowed it. And I look at my work and I go, I've taken pictures that a lot of people just turned down, other people didn't want to do, and I took them because I was on this journey, and I was not going to turn something down if I was available. If it's not unsafe, if it's not something I abhor morally, I'm going to embrace whatever job is in front of me. I mean, I got fired on my first television series, Beauty and the Beast, because my crew refused to walk into an unsafe environment. And this is way before the safety councils and all this
This
stuff.
is like 80s, right? I
Yeah.
mean, when nobody was talking about this stuff. What was
No.
the unsafe environment? You mean environmentally? There was...
It was, we were in an abandoned, and those are the days when we didn't scout, our best boys would scout.
Yeah.
And the best boys came back and said, this building is unsafe, it's dangerous.
Okay.
And the production said, okay, well, we'll put out this memo. So they put out this memo, this building's unsafe, be careful where you go, don't go.
It's unsafe, so be careful.
Yeah, don't go any place you're not supposed to go.
Oh, jeez.
So, okay, I get to the set that day. And the crew's all outside. This is down in Long Beach. It was an old gymnasium,
Okay.
5-6 story building. Someone had fallen to their death a week before we'd been there.
You mean like through the floors or something?
No,
or,
through the elevator
Through
shaft.
the
They
elevator.
walked
Jeez, good Lord.
lead-based paint dangling down
Oh,
from.
for God's sakes.
And so I get there. You know, I'm not a safety officer, and I'm just there to work. My crew's saying, no, we're not going in there. So I go to, I'd done the pilot, and the production manager who they hired after the pilot and the new line producer wanted their own cinematographer. They didn't want me. But the creatives wanted me. So I was already at a disadvantage. And I'd not done television before. To me, you know, I was there to serve the director and serve the material. I didn't understand the below the line,
Yeah.
the line producer situation whatsoever. So we get there, the crew's refusing. I go to the producers and I say, what are we going to do? And they said, well, it's not what we're going to do. What are you going to do? You got to go tell our crew to go in and do the day. And I said, well, I can't do that. And they said, why not? It's your crew. And I said, yeah, it's not my crew. It's your crew. I'm not management. I'm a director of photography.
I'm one of
Yeah.
your crew, too. Yeah.
I don't hire anybody here. They're part of your crew. And I said, besides, I'm not a safety officer. I said, call in OSHA, have them come in and inspect the place, and then they can give you a certification, and you can say, well, we got it from OSHA. You got to go inside.
Yeah.
And then you have something. But me? So I did. I went to the crew and said, so what do you think about going in? No, we're not going in. Okay. So I go back to producers, and they said, they're not coming in. Well, we're going to replace the crew. I said, well, do what you have to do, but I can't work without a crew. And, this crew knows what we're doing. I think that we've made a big mistake.
Yep.
Okay. So they shut down for the day. And so the next day we're at Warner Brothers. And it's funny how you always hear what's going on in the set through the Teamsters.
That's a good point.
And I began to hear that I'm being replaced.
Like on the van ride in or something like that?
I'm not with me. I mean, I'm hearing on set.
Yeah.
Crews coming up to me and say, "Hey, we're being replaced."
Okay.
What, how are we being replaced? They love me. And I go to the creatives, and they said, no, that's not going to happen. Don't worry about it. And this is going on progressively all day. I'm getting more and more of it. And finally, at the end of the day, I go to Ron Koslow, who's the creator of the show, and with Thomas's production connection. And they say, look, when we wrap, let's go to Copper Penny. Don't worry about it. It's not going to happen. So we go to Copper Penny across from Warner Brothers, which isn't there anymore. I'm fired. I'm devastated. I've never been fired in my life. I am devastated. I can't believe this. Why am I fired? Oh, you're too slow. And that's what the producers are saying. Okay. So all day long, they brought in another cinematographer who should have called me up and said, look, this is what's going on. He's a friend now, so, he's a good guy, very good guy. But he should have called me up and said, this is what's going on. And I've certainly done that before, and I've had it done to me before. He didn't do that. So I'm done. I get a phone call from, I don't remember who, one of the crew saying, we're going to file a grievance. And, okay, grievance. I'm new to the union. I didn't really know what to do, but I said, okay, I'll go along with that. I call up 659, the camera local, and I said, don't even, it's ridiculous. Forget about it. You were fired. That's the way it is. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So the Grip and Electric 728 and Local 80 said, we'll support you in this. They're going to support me. I mean, they're the ones that made the choice.
Yeah.
But we're going to support you in this. I went, okay. So we go to Labor Relations Board, and it takes 6 months, 8
As
months.
you say, it's a process. Yeah.
Yeah, but in the meantime, I'm watching my show and I'm crying at night.
Oh, jeez.
I'm just devastated.
Wow.
This is so hilarious. It's hilarious now. Billy Fraker was one of my best friends. My dad. I should tell you that my dad, who had quit baseball because he was going to die when he was 50. He died when he was 50.
Oh my gosh.
And what happened was, and I didn't know this until after, when my mother was 90 years old, and she told me the story. My dad had given up his dream. And he'd never talked to me about this, but there was something instilled inside of me that said, never give up on your dream.
Because of that, yeah.
And so that's why I'm so passionate about this, and you have to be passionate to survive this business.
There's no question about that. It's too hard.
But anyway, so back to Dad. Okay, how did I get back to that?
Bill Fraker.
Bill Fraker.
Yep.
Bill Fraker, and Harry had died 2 months after my father died.
Wow.
And so Lenny South, Bill Fraker, Conrad Hall are sort of like my dad now. So at 4 o'clock in the morning, walking out of Copper Penny, I can't call my wife. I can't call my kids. They're asleep. They don't realize their whole world has just changed.
Yeah.
And this is like enormous. So I got to call Billy. I'll call up Billy, 4 o'clock in the morning. I call up Billy, and he said, what the fuck are you calling me for this early in the morning? I said, Billy, I just got fired. I got fired on my show. I can't believe it. He said, well, congratulations. You can now call yourself a director of photography. And I was so angry at him. I said, how can you say this? I was looking for sympathy, and he was giving me none.
Yeah.
And he said, no, well, every one of us has been fired. You got to do this. This is part of it. And I, of course, have to go home to my family and tell them. And they have to put up with me for all this 6 months.
Yeah.
But while I'm going through this, abandoning him, my child has been murdered. 6 months later, and during all this time, I'm getting these surreptitious phone calls late at night from someone saying, you're never going to work in this business again.
Oh, my gosh.
You've got to drop this case. You're never going to work in this business
So
again.
basically threatening you.
Yeah. I don't know any better. I'm the young guy. I'm the new guy, and I'm scared. But I continue on with this, and finally, the Labor Relations Board says, I was going to get paid my contract, which I was guaranteed 12 episodes.
Yeah.
I was going to get paid that, so they paid me my money. They didn't think I would support the crew.
The crew, yeah.
And that's why they were threatening me.
Yeah, because they've got to pay the entire crew that they let go, yeah.
And
If it goes through.
I said, no, my crew needs to be paid for my whole guarantee. But unless they did something wrong, they had the expectation they would.
Sure. And they've turned down other work and everything else.
And that had never happened in Hollywood before. And so that Labor Relations Board agreed with us and paid my crew, the grip, electric, and camera.
For 12 episodes.
On 12 episodes.
That's unreal. I had no idea.
And it's throughout my career, I've gotten this whispered reputation for being this Oh, he's only for his crews. He protects his crews. And it's true. I've protected my crews a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I changed the rules at Universal, which they used to give breakfast only to the director and the cast and the cinematographer in the morning. Until one morning I said, oh, well, I'm getting in my car. I'm going out to McDonald's. I'm going to buy the crew breakfast. And they stopped me at the gate. The guard at the gate, his name was Whitey. He was from Scotland. He said, Roy, you got to go back on the set. And I said, okay, we'll bring breakfast in for the crew. And when they started doing that. But it didn't come without consequence. Roy Wagner became this bad guy for production.
Well, as a crew member, I appreciate the fact that you stood up for the crew.
It was ridiculous. You used to have to pay for coffee and donuts. It was crazy.
Yeah.
But anyway, so my whole crew got paid on this.
That's wild.
And I got nominated for the pilot.
I was going to say, and you won the ASC award and the Emmy for.
I got
right?
award. I got the nomination for the ASC award, but I got the award for the Emmy. And I'm sitting in the back of the room. The Emmys are always for the old guard, the net generation. The old guys got it.
And you were the young guy.
I was a young punk, and so I was sitting in the back with my friend Ron Koch, who was in charge of Deluxe Labs, and Bud Stone, and my wife, and some friends, and just laughing and having a good time.
You're not expecting to go up on stage.
And they're calling out the awards and all this stuff, and my wife says, Roy, they just called your name. I said, huh? What? They just called your name. You won for Beauty and the Beast. I went, no way. I haven't prepared any speech. I haven't prepared anything. And I'm way in the back. I'm having to walk through all these people, and they're all applauding. And I've got my head down. I'm so embarrassed. And the last table before, you can't make this stuff up. This is so crazy. The last table before I get to the podium is the Whit Thomas table.
Which is the
producers of Beauty and the Beast.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And Danny Thomas's son, Tony Thomas, grabs me, and he says, "We fucked up, didn't we?" And I said, "Yes, you did." And I go up to the stage. I still don't have a clue what I'm going to say. And I say, "I just want to thank Tony Thomas and Paul Witt and for all of their support." And everybody goes, "Oh, that's wonderful." Yeah. And not realizing it was sort of a slap in their face. Yeah. They tried to hire me back 2 other times.
Wow.
But I was never available. And here's what happened. I got a phone call after I settled. I got a phone call from somebody I'd never met before, didn't know who he was, didn't know the name. Seymour Friedman, who was the head of Screen Gems. And he was a monster. He was a tough guy. Everybody was frightened of him. He was like the most powerful production head in Hollywood. He didn't put up with anybody's bullshit. He called me up and he said, "I'm Seymour Friedman. Here you got fired on Beauty and the Beast." I said, "Yes, sir, I did." He said, "I hear it was not fair what happened to you." I said, "Oh, well, thank you." He said, "I want you to come visit. Come visit." So I went over to Burbank Studios, TBS at the time, and I met with him. He was a little tiny guy. And he said, "Look, he's been Frank Capra's assistant director, and he had grown up through Columbia Pictures, and he'd become incredibly powerful. And he was an executive in charge of production. He said, "Look, I'm going to put you under contract, and if you fuck up, you'll never ever work again. But if you do what I tell you to do, then this all will go away." I went, "Okay." And I did whatever he wanted me to do. I would go. I was the last cinematographer with a contract at the studio.
Really?
And
this was what year?
85, something like that.
I didn't realize it went that deep. I thought it was
Jerry Fenneman was Jerry Fenneman and I were the last 2 people who had contracts.
So you just had we've hired you for the year, and
it was 2 years.
2 years, and we'll tell you which project you're going to be on.
Oh
next,
yeah, and you bounce from one.
And you didn't have any say in it.
None. I did a pilot called Juarez. From that, I bounced into Houston Nights when that cinematographer left. They brought me into Houston Nights. I did Houston Nights for, I think, 8 episodes, 10 episodes. And then he said, we got a pilot that we did down in Puerto Vallarta. We can't use any of it. Bill Bixby's going to be the director and the new director, and you got to come in. You got to do it under these conditions, under these numbers,
with these people,
and with these people, all studio crew.
That makes you resilient, though, right? Because you're just thrown in the pool.
Yeah. And so they were, punk kid. They'd been at Warner Brothers since Casablanca. But one thing I learned about crews, they don't want to make more money. They want to go home. And I was fast because I'd learned how to do that when I was doing low-budget horror films and ninja films and all that stuff. And I was fast. I got them home quick. And they loved me. I mean, I became like, everybody wanted to work with me. So I went from that to the Bill Bixby project. I got called into Seymour's office one day, and he said, Roy, I got bad news for you. Oh, my. He said, I'm going to finish out your contract. You're done here. And I said, what did I do wrong? He said, no, you haven't done anything wrong. He said, I have recommended you to another producer over at Universal. And he's doing a pilot, and you're still going to be under our contract. We're going to pay you the money we pay you, but you're going to do the pilot at Universal. And he said, you better keep your nose clean. This guy is tough. He's very demanding. And it was Quantum Leap.
Oh, wow.
I did the pilot of Quantum Leap.
Yeah.
And from there, it just went.
Yeah.
And if it hadn't been for Seymour, I would have been gone.
That's amazing.
But there have been, throughout my career, there have been these people who have been there when I may have screwed up, or I may have been not who I should have been, because everybody's looking for, they're not perfect, but they want you to be perfect.
Yeah.
And so I've made plenty of mistakes.
But the key is you learn from them, right?
But not only that,
mistakes.
but I think, it's funny, for all the interviews I do with people, none of them want to know where the light goes. None of them want to know what lenses I used. They want to know, how did I survive 55 years? And I think that that's critically important because, in the era of Harry Stradling and those guys, they were all under contracts for, 4 to 6 years.
It was a job.
And they were there at MGM for 40 years. And, our generation, it's scary.
Yeah.
It's scary. I mean, I've often said, if you went to a crew and said, look, we will guarantee you a 4-year contract at this rate, I think 99% of us would take the contract.
Yeah.
Because the unions don't protect us.
It's guarantee. It's a guarantee. It's a longevity. So if you had to distill it down to how did you survive 50 years, 55 years, whatever the number was, what would you say it was?
I would say celebration of the journey, and not being being willing to make the turns in places where they didn't expect you to make the turn. Being willing to embrace what was not your particular point of view. You knowing the right way, but taking their way. I mean, it's funny how sometimes, Conrad used to talk about this, about the happy accidents. And that was his phrase. It's those things you think you shouldn't do, that if you do them, you'd be astonished sometimes at how amazing they turn out. If you don't put that light in, if you don't say, gee, if I only had this lens instead of that lens, if you're forced to do things that you wouldn't normally do, if you break yourself out of that box, it's amazing. And when people say, and this is principally why I get hired. I get hired on shows where they're in trouble. It's not something I'm proud of, but they get in trouble and they say, well, Roy will get us out of this. and it's generally about time or money. I did a project called Kidnapped in New York, and the producer called me up and said, "We're $1 million over budget. If you don't come and help me, I'm going to be fired." I went there, had a great time, met a lot of great new people. The project you and I worked on, they were going to fire that cinematographer.
Oh.
But I came in, showed them how fast you could work. I don't think he was happy that I was doing that. But I came in and did it. And so I've gotten this reputation for being fast. I think what ends up happening is that a lot of cinematographers become frightened of you because they're not willing to make those turns.
Yeah.
They think that they have to be autocratic and in this position. But again, if you assert your power, they see how little you have. But if you don't assert your power, then you have all that power. People often say, why do you dress up? I generally dress up a coat and a tie or try to present myself. They say, why do you dress up like that? And I say, Harry Stradling once told me that you dress to impress your enemies, not your friends. And what he meant by that was that when someone walks across a stage and they look and they see this person dressed in a suit and tie, they say, "Oh, that guy expects a certain kind of respect from me. So when I go up to him and talk to him, I'm going to give him that respect." Now, if you're in shorts and a Hawaiian shirt, I mean, we have this human nature. And as much as we all agree, it's better to dress like that, it's more fun to dress like that, if you are how you perceive yourself or how you see yourself. And so I have always gone with that to an extent that can be kind of crazy sometimes. But I think that, it's about respecting your position and respecting, where you're at, respecting the environment that you're in, so that people will say, well, he's taking this seriously. So that's why. That's
fantastic. I want to back up and just ask you about the experience of Cop Rock, because that show fascinates me. Can you just tell people who may not know what Cop Rock, what it was?
I had more fun on this show.
It had to be, right?
I had more fun. It was the worst idea conceivable.
This was 86, 85, something like that. And it was a Bochco show.
Stephen Bochco had a new contract at ABC. He could do no wrong.
Stephen Bochco was Hill Street Blues is the big one, right? Hill Street
Blues, NYPD Blue.
Yep.
But he hadn't done that yet.
Yep.
But Cop Rock was his maiden voyage into ABC. And his wife had Barbara, I forget her, Barbara Bochco is her name, but I can't remember her maiden name.
Yeah.
She was one of the actresses.
Oh.
She played the mayor or the governor or something like that. She loved musicals.
Okay.
And she wanted Stephen to do a musical. Well, Stephen loved crime. He loved the law. He loved crime.
So naturally.
And so, this combined effort, they had Stephen. I mean, if you think about it, it could put on a great Broadway show.
Sure. But it felt like a Broadway show, actually.
But the problem was you had the wrong composer. You had men who wanted to see the cop show, women who did not want to see the cop show, but they wanted to see the music, and you had the kids who would love to have seen the music in the cop show, but it was the wrong music.
Yeah.
It was hokey. The music was hokey.
It was hokey.
It was
right.
The worst composer for that kind of thing.
I will link to it for this episode so people can see it, because it's just it's so much fun.
The best one is the cop who. The song "Bumpty Bumpty" is by far the worst.
I'll find it and look it up.
I knew we were done when I joked on the set. We're finished now.
So this was actually my question, because basically, what were there, like 4 or 5 musical numbers in each episode, or were there more than that?
Yeah. There were 10 episodes, I think.
Yeah.
And the thing was that they had not figured out how to record live sound. Someone had come up with the idea, you got to record this music live.
That's what I heard. I can't remember who told me that. I can't remember. Someone was telling me that they recorded all the songs live.
Live with wireless microphones, 24-track mixing. So here's another.
Wait, was Randy Johnson on that? Was he the boom operator?
He may have been.
I think it was Randy Johnson who told me about that because he was telling me how crazy it was, and it never worked.
we had a recording studio, a 24-track mixing truck that would pull up to every one of our locations.
Wow.
Every actor was wired. And you know how bad wireless microphones are now. Then they were even worse.
I was going to say, yeah.
And it's hard enough to get one to work.
Yeah.
But to get 6 of them to work.
And back then, also, batteries weren't what they were,
no,
so they were probably going down all the time.
Popping and hissing and things like that, or interference. And so we would do this perfect take. There were times when I think there were a few times when we had 4 Steadicams on one shot.
Oh, I had no idea.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah, we were doing, like with music numbers, we weren't allowed to cut.
So you're sort of shooting it live
We had to shoot a live performance.
Wow.
All the way through. I mean, that's how this whole thing.
It just gets better and better.
Oh, it was fantastic, and it was like this 3-dimensional chess game, and we'd do this beautiful take, and I think Randy Nolan was one of my Steadicam operators,
probably,
and a great operator. And we did this great take, and we'd be bumping. We were inside of a set, which was a police station, which was life size. It was not expanded, so you get cameras in there or anything. It had ceiling pieces, everything like that. And we'd do this perfect take, and we'd have to wait for sound. And they would run back the take.
To listen to it to see if it was okay, yeah.
And there was one pop, we had to do it over.
Oh.
And so we were doing lots of takes. This is film. This is 4-per film.
Yeah.
And we're doing lots of takes over and over. And my brother, who was a camera assistant, who was a bad boy, he was reputably a bad boy. He took a one of those things that smell the stink bomb, and dumped it into the 24-track truck at one point because he was so fed up, and the crew was cheering him.
You mean because he's fed up of doing 12 takes that were perfect because this
and
was a pop.
we would do that
boy.
But it was like it was not built for. If it were just one of those things, it would have been perfect. But if it was just a cop show, it would have been great. If it was just music, it would have been great. But all together with those people, it was the wrong thing. The last thing we shot was. We had a great cast, amazing cast, great singers. I mean, you have to see the show. I'm actually proud of the show.
In a weird way, it's really great, and it was ahead of its time. I mean,
way
clearly,
ahead of
it
its
sounds.
time.
Look, it sounds like technologically they were trying to do something they weren't ready to do yet. That was a big part of it. But also, like you said, it was. It's hokey.
Yeah, it was really.
But I sort of love how hokey it is. I mean,
you got to watch it.
Yeah.
I promise you, if you get through it, you're going to go, wow, that was amazing that they got through. They did all of that, and you're going to see some of the most hokey, comedic songs.
Well, the thing that I remember about it, and I should watch it again. I haven't seen it in a while, but the thing I remember, it has this sort of like, let's all put on a show.
It
feel.
is. It is. And again, there's some extraordinary talent.
Yeah.
And with those singers, I mean, absolutely extraordinary talent. And the last show we did with Ronnie Cox was one of the actors.
Sure.
Amazing talent.
Yeah.
And the last thing we did is we were in his set. He was I think he was chief of police. And we flew all the walls of his set on camera, and a fat lady came down on a swing from the top of the stage, and she started singing. The fat lady sang.
And that was it.
And that was the end of the show. With cameras pulling back. How does it get better than that?
It's like I said, I will put a link to it and a couple links maybe, and anybody who hasn't seen it should take the time because it's something. There's no question about it.
I was until they brought it back out on DVD.
Yeah.
I would never talk about it. I'd never talk to people. I looked at it again. I went, wow. This is so bad. It's really good.
It's fun to watch. There's no question about it. And you can see how on paper early on, someone went, this has potential, but it's one of those things that at some point, and I'm glad they never did it, but at some point someone should have said, I think we're going down a road here that doesn't
Everybody
work.
said that. Everybody
or
said
someone
that.
with power should have said it.
But
Well, someone did
they
eventually,
did say
obviously,
that, but
yeah.
they were all committed.
But again, it's Bochco at the height of Bochco.
And
he
I
could
have
do no
to
wrong.
tell you that someday somebody's going to do that kind of thing on Broadway.
Yeah.
Or they're going to do it as a television with the right composer,
Yeah.
with the right connection, right combination, and it'll work. I have to tell you that the pilot episode, Kathleen Wilhoit, I think, is the actress. There is a song in the pilot that will blow you away.
Okay,
It is
I'll have to watch it.
incredibly powerful.
Yeah. Well, there were some great voices on there, and there were some good tunes. It's just again, it had that
mostly
hokey
not.
feel, unfortunately.
No, mostly not.
Well, I think that's a great subject to maybe head out on. I'm going to leave you with my last question. Thank you so much for this. This has been fantastic hearing
My
your
pleasure.
stories and learning from you. The question that I leave everybody with at the end is basically a new operator, someone getting into the business, a student trying to get into the business. What advice can you give them on how to succeed?
It's so simple. I mean, it's so old-fashioned. Respect your elders, and don't be afraid of turning the corner that you think might be the wrong corner. Have courage, and respect those that surround you. Everybody that surrounds you. It's a business of transition. Sometimes one day you'll be the director of photography. Maybe the next day you be craft service, and you've got to kind of respect it in that way. And if you love the process, which I love the process, what I really love are the people. It's not unlike going to war, because it's all about the buddy system. And you want to make sure your buddy gets home safely. And if you understand that, you will rebuild this community quicker than you can imagine. The solidarity isn't on the picket line. The solidarity is amongst each other on a movie set. And it's not being tough or drawing a line in the sand. It's about finding your place and being willing to protect your buddy.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. We'll be back soon with another great episode. Don't forget to check us out on theop.io for all sorts of information on operating and storytelling. So thanks for listening and have a great day.